Um, if you could turn on your videos this morning, we appreciate seeing faces. We will have some time for an open Q&A toward the end of Liz's presentation, where then we'll invite you to take yourselves off mute. But during the presentation, it's a better experience for everyone if you can keep yourself muted so we minimize some of those background noises. But we want to thank you for joining us. And with that, I will turn it over to Jan.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's so good to see you. Thank you for being here. It's interesting. We have all kinds of different topics. This morning is one that is so important. And so I'm glad that this mighty group of women have committed to being here to talk about this subject that might not be as exciting as some of the other things that we talk about. I know Sharon's here, and a couple months ago, Sharon Reeves did a presentation on EQ, and we had, oh my goodness, we had a whole tribe from the county. And so it's interesting, and I'm glad that you're here. Nothing could be more important than to talk about this topic this morning. But before we get to that, just a couple of quick things. Well, let's see, my screen is there. We go. Okay. For those of you who might be business owners on the call, we have Perspectives Roundtables. Anna and I were just talking about how important this networking is for small business owners. And so if you know anyone that is a business owner, any woman, we have one women-centric group happening right now, and we'd like to start another one in the fall. They meet once a month for 3 hours, and they become great peer supporters of each other, and we are able to really talk about some things that maybe they wouldn't share with other people, but it's a confidential group. They all sign NDAs, and I would just encourage you, if you know anyone who's in business, especially right now as we recover from COVID, encourage them to check this out. They can email me or go to the Chamber website and get a little bit more information about this. Great program. Love working with women business owners and being engaged in supporting them along the path. Really want to make sure that we always acknowledge our sponsors. We have tremendous sponsors that make this programming available to us. And so I'm just going to give a shout out to them this morning, take a peek at them, and thank them. If you ever see anybody that's with Akron Children's or Browse or State and Federal or Key, just thank them. Retzel, Huntington, and then AT&T, Bober, Markey, Fedorovich, Dominion Energy, and JW Didato Electric. This slide talks about a course that starts on March 16th. Now, this was done for the spring course, and I didn't change the date. I just want to remind you all that this is happening again in the fall. So September 21st, we will be launching another Authentic Leadership Leading with Strength. This is really a safe space for any woman who wants to develop leadership skills and professional colleagues and build a network. So if you know anyone in your tribe who's interested in professional development, that is a commitment of 6 times, but really digs into their strengths and how they can make shifts in their leadership to be more impactful, I would encourage you to let them know. We have another course that starts next week, and Celia King, I'm not sure if I can't see everybody. I know she was signed up for today. If you're out there, Celia, just wave to everyone. She has a great little business, Aaron's McSwain, where she does executive coaching, very impactful for leaders. And we're offering a 5-session How Congruent Leaders Build Strong Teams executive coaching series. You can see the testimonial on there from one woman who's engaged with her. So I would just encourage you to consider it, or again, pass the love along. And then following that, on the 4th of May, we have another curriculum, Negotiating with Strength. And this is just a picture of the class from last summer. It's interesting. Dr. Julie Chen has a interesting quote. She's the division director of neurosurgery at Akron Children's Hospital. And she signed up for negotiating at the recommendation of someone in her organization who said she needed to learn how to negotiate. And one of the last comments she made and gave me permission to use was, one thing she learned is that some struggles are universal, and negotiating seems to be one of those universal struggles for women. So check it out on our website or send me an email. I'd be happy to talk to you more about it. Next month, May has Small Business Week. And so during the month of May, we are going to hear from 3 women-owned businesses, and they're going to talk about their journey. They're all very different industries, but have a lot to share about their leadership journey. And it'll be a panel, and I encourage you to join us and listen to their stories, be here to support them, and post this to your social media if you think this is something you want to get out to your group. I also want to mention, before we get to today's speaker, that we have the Women of Achievement Awards coming up with a deadline of April 16th. For those of you who aren't aware of what that is, it's an annual event, and we honor 3 different women in the community in 3 different categories. Anna's going to put the link in the chat. So if you want to just access that link will tell you about the Woman of Achievement Award, the Laura Alio Emerging Leader Award, and the Dorothy O. Jackson Award. We, over the years, have always had a luncheon, and we've gathered at the Hilton in Fair Lawn. This year, it will again be virtual. It'll be in the month of July. The entire month of July is dedicated to women. We have a great panel on the 15th of July coming to talk about how COVID has impacted women and the economic impacts of that. And Sarah Sanford from the West Coast, who has Gender Equity Now, will be joining us for that. And a local CEO who is going to be talking about what he's doing to make his workplace gender friendly. So you don't want to miss that. And then the last week of July, on the 27th, we will have a virtual event, and we will honor the winners of this award. So July is an important month for women. Mark it down on your calendar. Anna, have I missed any announcements? Anything that you can think of before we move on?
The only other thing I'm thinking is, if you are one of the alumni from one of our curriculums,
Yes.
we have a LinkedIn group specifically for the alumni, in order for you to be able to connect with each other, share any updates that you want. We're also posting, we have quarterly events for the alum. Some of those we have been able to open up to the community, but our next one in May 5th is going to be alumni only. So make sure, I'll post the link. I know I threw a bunch of links in the chat. I'll post the link to that LinkedIn group. You do have to request to join, and please only request if you've been through at least one of our curriculums. So negotiating with strengths, managing with strengths, leading with strengths. You may have gone through leading with strengths as something, it might have been called the CLI, but that counts as the same thing. I think you got everything else though, Jan.
Thank you, Anna, my trusty partner here. Thanks, I appreciate all you do for us, Anna. And we are so privileged today to have Liz Hand with Pleasant Financial, who is here to talk about 5 factors that modern women should know about retirement. So I'm just going to make a few comments before she takes over. Liz, you gave me some of your talking points, and they're all very interesting, but I am really interested in hearing about the pink tax. I think that sounds like a very fascinating tax that I need to learn about. So thank you for joining us. And I'm going to remove my PowerPoint now, and I'll turn it over to you. She is a certified financial planner. She has a YouTube channel called Pleasant Financial Conversations. You all need to follow her on LinkedIn. She's amazing, and she puts these these conversations out on LinkedIn that are so real. She's talking right to you as she talks about them, and I found out so many little tips from her on those. So welcome, Liz. Thank you for being here to share your expertise, and we're happy to have you here. And I'll let you take over the program.
Great. Thank you so much, Jan. Before we get started, I'm really pleased to be here with you this morning. My hope is to give you some food for thought here at the beginning and then really open up the conversation, because I recognize that women don't often talk about money and it's a little bit uncomfortable. And so we want to create the space for you to be able to ask the questions that are top of mind for you, the things that are keeping you up at night, that you find yourself at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. kind of stirring on. So before I do that, though, I have my obligatory disclaimers that I'm going to happily read to you right now, and I'll share my screen so you can also read it along. This live stream is intended for general education purposes. It is not specific legal, tax, or investment advice. So before considering acting on anything that you hear or see in this video, first consult with your tax, legal, or investment advisor. And then for me, I offer securities through Kestra Investment Services, which is a member of FINRA and SIPC. Investment advisory services are offered through Kestra Investment Advisory Services. And Pleasant Wealth is not affiliated with either Kestra Investment or Kestra Advisory. And there is more legal disclosures if you are so inclined. All right. Glad we got through that. So here is something that I think is just, maybe you've noticed how marketing seems to have changed, where you're seeing a lot of advertising that's geared now towards women. And that's because of a fact that has been researched, and that is by 2030, women will control 2/3 of the nation's wealth. And maybe that fact, you can't quite believe it, but that is what researchers have found. And so as we think about what it means to be stepping towards retirement as a woman, there are 5 key factors that I found that are headwinds that we have to face and figure out, once we have them in the open and can see them, what it is that we're going to do to navigate them. So the first is that women are paid 80% of income compared to our male counterparts. And you've heard that statistic before. That's not a shock to you. But what that means is that in everyday life, we don't have as much to spend. But it also means that we don't have as much for our future. So if you think about Social Security, that is a calculation based on your earned income over time. Or if you have a pension, maybe you have, you've got teachers, state employees, they have pensions. It's all based on your income. So if your income is 80% less of your male counterparts, that means your future pension is also less. For those companies that offer 401ks or profit sharing plans, that's a percentage based on income. And so if you're paid 80% of the male counterpart in the same job, then you are getting less money from the company for your future. The headwind number 2 is that women tend to step out of the workforce. We are natural caregivers. And so there are different times in life where we find it appropriate to step out. And so maybe by a show of hands, give us an indication if you have ever stepped out of the workforce for any small or large period of time. It might be part-time. For me, I took off Fridays for a period of time when I first had my children. Taking care of parents, taking care of an ailing spouse, just stepping out. Women are much more comfortable stepping out of the workforce. So what does that mean financially? Well, of course, it means that there's less cash flow today to make decisions with, but also it impacts the future. So that means less Social Security, because Social Security is based on income. It also means less in pensions. But it's shown that when you have an employment gap, if you're stepping back into the workforce, you're often not paid at the same trajectory that you were on. So if I would, I'm not going to go with numbers, but if I was on this trajectory, but I stepped out, I might come in at a lower pay than I could have been if I stayed in that whole time. So we often lose that momentum of income growth. Headwind number 3 is that women invest too conservatively. And what that does is that it requires us to save more for our future. So if I am not willing to take on the risk of the stock market, I don't get as much growth in my portfolio, and therefore I have less later, unless I save more to compensate for that. So women are investing too conservatively. Headwind number 4 is what Jan alluded to, which is the pink tax. And that is that women pay more for goods and services that we experience. And so what I'm encouraging you to do is use the chat feature. I can't look at the chat feature, but you guys are looking at that right now. And think about goods and services that you have or obtain or maybe even offer. Oftentimes, women are paying more for those goods and services. So just some examples that I've seen in my own life, and of course you guys can add some in the chat there. Razors. So you have 2 razors sitting on the shelf. One is blue and one is pink. The pink one is more expensive. You've got diapers. You got a blue diaper or a pink diaper. The pink diaper is going to be more expensive. Baby clothes. Of course, I'm in baby land because I'm a mom and my kids are in like the toddler stage, and so that's kind of what's top of mind for me right now. But girls' clothes are more expensive. I have a coworker that brought in a little toolkit, and it was a pink toolkit, very cute, fit her hand, it was like made for women. It was much more expensive than the toolkit that could have been purchased that was made for a man. And so, yes, feminine products, I can see that one. Yes. Think about dry cleaning. Some of those things we just bump into more expensive goods and services on a day-to-day basis. And I've got I can sit on a soapbox for that one for a period of time, but I had a conversation with my husband. My husband works in supply chain and he's very logical. And so I was talking about this with him and he said, well, yeah, okay, but let's go to that toolkit example. The toolkit that's made for a male is like streamlined. That's their main product that they're making. And this female toolkit is more of an anomaly, and therefore it requires more costs for the company because they're having to seek out a different design, slightly different process. And I said, yes, that is true. And that's only because we're coming at the world from the male perspective. And so if you think about legislative things that have been put in place, actually, I'm going to pause on that thought, just going to goods and services. If goods and services have been crafted for the male counterpart, well, naturally women's products are going to be more expensive because we're considered the anomaly and not the mainstream. But this is changing. Tides are changing. 2030 is coming. 2/3 of women will be controlling the nation's wealth. And so let's go into item number 5, this headwind number 5 that we experience, and that is that we live longer than our male counterparts. And so I'm curious if you can put in the chat right now what you guess the average life expectancy is for a woman or a man. And I'll see them as they pop up here. Women 89, 70 male, 78 man, women 85. And honestly, there are different people who have done this research and they come up with different numbers. So the big factor that I want you to remember is that we live about 5 years longer. But in the statistic that I had read, it was men live to an average age of 76 and women to an average age of 81. So if we live 5 years longer than our male counterparts, it also means that financially we have to plan for an extra 5 years. It means an extra 5 years of exposure to long-term care needs. So yes, the need for money is longer. So I just want to put these 5 factors back into a story for you so that we can really use this as a jumping off point that we can discuss today. So women are paid 80% of that our male counterparts are paid. And therefore we have less to spend today and we have less for our future. And jumping to the pink tax, we spend more on goods and services. Therefore, with our smaller salary, 80% of what our male counterparts are made, we're having to spend more for the same goods and services, which leaves less for our future. Then we are investing too conservatively, and therefore we have to save more for retirement, which means with our current paycheck, not only are we spending more for the goods and services, but we'll have to squeeze out more towards our savings for the future. Then we are stepping out of the workforce more often as caregivers, which puts goose eggs or even less money towards Social Security, pensions, etc. We have less security for our future, and yet we are living longer. We have 5 years extra that we have to plan for. And so women are really facing a pretty big headwind with the financial world. And what I see from this, stepping back, and this is what I was just getting ready to say and withheld myself, is that a lot of these structures that have been put in place, the way that pensions are formed, the way that the Social Security is structured, they were made because women were not sitting at the table. And so there is a structural issue. And yet you and I both have freedom of what we can choose with the money that we have. And so that's why we wanted to open up this conversation with you, just to talk about what is top of mind for you with your personal finance. So with that, I'm going to open it up. You are welcome to unmute yourself and ask any questions.
Liz, I'll start this off. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So, we have research that Women's Network Leadership Institute has done locally, and this is a very real issue in Summit County. In fact, I would argue that the wage gap is even a little bit bigger in our community. It's Midwest, Old Rubber Town, Greater Akron has a lot of ripple effect from that. Can you talk about like the economic issue a little bit? Because, if we make less now, we may, not everyone, but I would venture to guess that at the end of our lives, more of us move into that depending on the government. So this is really an economic issue. It's like if we don't get paid now, somebody's going to have to pay it later. Is there any research that you know of that talks to that? I'm just curious because, having elderly parents, aunts, uncles in this age range, I mean, it's really interesting to see how some of them in the last 5 years of their life really do, run out of money.
Mm-hmm.
And as the women living longer, they're living on a very, very meager income. Is there any research that bears that out?
If I can paraphrase and then correct me if I'm misunderstanding, you're asking, is there research out talking about women running out of money more often?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know of any specific research. I imagine it's out there. I haven't looked at that specifically. But I think because of the longevity that we have and the more exposure, therefore, that we need long-term care. So whether that's actually in a facility, which is incredibly expensive, it's
Mm-hmm.
here in Ohio, it's maybe $7,000 a month
Mm-hmm.
that you're having to spend towards long-term care if you need it in a home. It's going to drain the investments long-term. And what I do hear sometimes, so that just creates the need for more conversations about what it means to set aside money for long-term care insurance. If preserving money for the next generation, or just assuring that you're able to stay in the type of care that you want. It's a reason to look at long-term care insurance, which is expensive, but for women, I think it's important.
What made you get into this business, Liz? I'm curious about that. I hear you're always very passionate on your YouTube channel talking. How did you happen on this?
So my dad is in the industry, and I started working when I was in 8th grade. He had me come to the office and just help him organize, just menial tasks, but he allowed me to sit in on a meeting with a client. And I just remember it felt like a sacred space to me, where someone was being fully transparent with their money, which I had never heard people actually talk about their money, even with my dad in the home. Like, we didn't talk about the family financial situation. So this was a space where someone was being vulnerable enough to share what was happening, and solutions were brought to the table. And I found that, like, I'm a helper at heart. And so I was like, oh, this is a really practical way that I can help people. And so that started me towards the path of financial planning. I studied all the business classes in high school. I went to college I went to Mount Vernon Nazarene for financial management. But it wasn't until I actually stepped into the business in 2010 where I noticed I had several mentors in my life say, you know what, there's not that many women in financial services. You should consider it. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. But in 2014, I had two back-to-back incidents where one was a good friend of mine, a peer, so in her 20s, lost her husband um, in an accident, in a boating accident. And I just saw how she went reeling and like the emotional highs and lows. I got a very close look at that. And I also heard her talking about how she would call the bank, you know, her she had just gotten a heartbreaking story. She had just gotten married like 9 months before. She had a loan on something, and um, while they were still asking for her for payment for the loan, they weren't accepting her request to like go through the estate process of taking her husband off because he needed to be the one on the phone. And she's like, well, he's not here. You're asking me for this payment, but I can't. Like, these are the financial structures that are in place. And for women that are going through a huge emotional spin of life, chaotic, um, it's just it's difficult. And so I got that really close look. And then simultaneously, in our business, we had purchased a practice, and I had stepped next to an advisor who was getting ready to retire, and I was just starting to meet all of his clients and get a good feel for taking them over, getting a good feel for their financial plan. And there was a woman who lost her husband pretty suddenly, and I just saw that same cycle of chaos that happens when you lose someone that you love. But I recognized my power in that situation because we're sitting at the table, and I noticed she was like urgently trying to get some things done. And in that process, she had about a 20-minute window where she was paying attention. And then after that, she glazed over. And I'd heard story after story after story of um, there are multiple parts of my industry, and there's one part that's so sales driven, and I get really frustrated with it. And the classic peg is the annuity salesman. So annuities are not bad. I'm saying that now. But people who use annuities to use a fearful situation or a chaotic situation to sell an annuity, that I have some strong feelings about. But I've heard story after story of women getting their money locked up into annuities soon after their spouse passes away. And so I thought, like, oh, I'm the person that holds this space for her when she's trying to take action to do something, but I know she shouldn't be making, because she's not actually present to the decision that she's making. So that was a really long-winded decision or answer to your question, but that is why I'm so passionate about what I do.
Thank you for that. That's very interesting.
Hey, Liz, can you talk a little bit about what obviously divorce does to your retirement, and what does that mean for women when they're single and suddenly saving by themselves?
Yeah. So when you get divorced, what I often see for women is that just by the nature that we have not as much conversation around money, a lot of comfort in our home, that oftentimes in a divorce situation, a woman will negotiate to keep the home. And what that does is it splits out most of the assets, the investments or savings would go to the male their husband in that traditional couple. And what it can leave is a woman with not enough for retirement. Likely she's been the one to step out of the workforce for caregiving, and therefore her Social Security is lower, and she will have to make up for that by saving extra hard. So I've seen women after their kids are out of the home trying to make up for lost time by saving like 25% of their income, which ends up being doable, but also feels really daunting to hear, I imagine. But did you have further questions? Did I answer it the way that you wanted it?
No, that's good. I wonder how often, I know I have a friend currently actually going through divorce, and she spent a number of years at home. And so, there was the question of, his retirement then, how much of that was she really entitled to? Obviously, it's a 50-50 state, but there was some internal argument about, that's mine. I earned it. Well, I contributed because I stayed home and saved us childcare costs. So, yeah.
Yes, we cannot underestimate the actual financial impact on a family by someone stepping out of the workforce and caregiving, because it provides a lot of stability for the family, and it allows the other person to fully devote themselves to their job and career climb as they desire.
Liz, TRM Low. You mentioned that women are conservative investors. So if you were giving somebody advice or a recommendation to not be conservative, what would that look like?
I'm going to answer this two ways. I'm going to answer it directly and then not just go to the symptom, go to the root. So with that, I think if what I try to do, if there's a woman who is telling me that she doesn't want to invest so conservatively, she doesn't want to invest as much in the stock market, I try to encourage her to, well, first I'm trying to understand, is she a person that actively checks her statements? And no shame here, a lot of people don't check their statements. So if she's not actively engaged in watching her accounts grow, then maybe we can stretch her just a little bit and go a little bit more aggressive than she is usually accustomed to or naturally accustomed to, because she won't be watching the ups and downs as much. So then once that triggering event happens, like in March of last year, where you get that shock of, oh my goodness, everybody's talking about how the stock market is down, I need to go check my investment account. Well, hopefully we've entered into that conversation. It's grown substantially, and she can get the coaching in the moment of, you know what, things are going to come back. The stock market is based on businesses producing goods and services and people buying them. So if you think that people are going to stop buying goods and services, yes, we can go more conservative now. But if you think that 3 years from now, people will still be buying goods and services at the rate that they are today, then you need to stay fully invested. So kind of helping her stretch her conservative nature, and then also coaching her through the process. But then going back to the root cause, like, one thing as women is that we don't have the muscle memory of talking about investing. We don't have the muscle memory. We might talk about budgeting. We have a very high comfort with budgeting and a comfort in talking with friends about budgeting. But because we are such caregivers and we have maybe compartmentalized out or outsourced the investments part of the conversation, there's just so much jargon there that it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming to take on. And so in our circles, like, you think about men, they're on the golf course and they'll bring up investments. They'll talk about how their investment performed. They'll talk about where they're investing, whether it's a US growth stock or a foreign stock or in a bond, whatever it is. They'll talk through that. I have never had a conversation casually with someone, unless they were actually asking me like my professional opinion, of just like sitting around talking about investments. And I'm curious if you have, like, hands raised, common conversation amongst your gal pals? No. So this lack of muscle memory, a comfort level of talking about, what does an IRA actually stand for? Oh, individual retirement account. Okay, I didn't know that. 401k, what does that mean? What is a Roth? Like, there are elements of the conversation that if we can start having more casual conversations about investments, then we can build the muscle memory to stretch our conservative nature, because part of it is just not familiar with it. Therefore, I will defer to what I'm familiar with, which is a bank account. I'm familiar with cash going in and out of a bank account. And therefore, I want to stay as conservative as that, or maybe just a little bit more than that.
I have a question. Liz, how many women are actually in your field? Because one of the things I think is contributing to this is because we don't feel comfortable going to a man, because we always see them as, the authority. I should speak for myself. I feel them as an authority figure, and it just makes me uncomfortable. I'm the person that always looks for a woman doctor for everything. So if you don't see yourself in the person you're talking to, it's hard to let go of, maybe the fact that you don't invest or you don't have savings. You don't want to, so I guess the question is, how many people are in your field? Or women are in your field, and is it going up?
It is increasing right now. So with a lot of these financial fields like CPAs, like attorneys, like financial planning, financial advising, the picture of the field is still older white male. It's my dad, you know. It's someone that's in their 60s advising, and so there. But there is a new wave of people coming into the field. There's actually degrees in financial planning. There used to not necessarily be a degree available. And so women are being actively recruited, and also women of color. That is such a low representation, or people of color. That's such a low representation in the field, and it's growing. And there's active organizations that are working to try to recruit young men and women in college age to get them towards the field, because there will be a gap between the current stereotypical advisor as they age out, as they retire, as they pass away. There's a gap in age for advising. So I don't know.
Liz, a follow-up on that, like in my industry, women are not women are the minority in my type of industry as well. And one of the things I found fascinating in my industry is they were saying, like 70% of the people in my industry that are the traditional white male are 60 and older, which means in the next 15 years they're retiring. So in your industry, do you have that same type of, the reality is that all those people doing it, they don't have enough people to help fund them to do that transition. And
Right.
Is it starting to spoke out to those different women and the other, where you didn't have that before?
Right. Yes. There was fascinating. We talk in our industry about, planning for the end of life, planning for disability, all of those things. And yet the cobbler has no shoes, or whatever, however the saying goes. Like the people who are giving the advice are not practicing the advice. And so what is unfortunate is that as advisors are having to either retire, or they pass away, or they are disabled, their clients are just kind of like scattered. It's a very common occurrence. And so there is just such a wave of niche financial planners coming out that are just designing things differently. So if you're curious, the XY Planning Network is one that is younger advisors in financial planning. So not stockbrokers necessarily, but financial planning, and building smaller practices and actively looking at the succession long term. So, and the CFP board is really starting to step in and trying to give more education on that as well.
Sharon Reeves has her hand up, Liz.
Oh, okay.
Sharon,
I can't see anything.
I know you can't. That's right. So I wanted to make sure we didn't miss her. I didn't want to cut you off, but so go ahead, Sharon.
Thanks, Jan. I'm going back to the conversation you had about gal pals talking about this thing. At one point, there was a wave of investment plus. As a matter of fact, it was a very popular one in Akron, in the Greater Akron area, and I don't know whatever happened to it. I just kind of stopped getting information about it. Are we not doing that anymore? And they were particularly female oriented and driven.
Mm-hmm.
Do they still exist? Is this a wave gone by?
No, I mean, they're still actively promoted to me, like businesses trying to help me sell me the ability to give the educational courses. I know they're still out there. There is one specifically for women who are going through divorce and wanting to learn about finances. I can maybe follow up with that resource. I have it at my computer, but no, they are still available. They are starting to look different. So like, I don't offer an in-person course right now, but that is the whole purpose of my YouTube channel. And Jan didn't mention this, but I also have a Facebook group, online community for women, Pleasant Financial Conversations. You're all welcome to join. And that is created, so I curate content to help educate in a very easy to approach manner, so that you can consume it as you're going through your day. And I just think education is turning. Some people like to set aside the time, just like you're saying, Sharon, and some people like don't want to make the commitment Like, it's just too scary. And so that's why I like my YouTube videos and the Pleasant Financial Conversations community on Facebook, where I can help, just start the conversation, pique a curiosity, make you one day just look at how much you're actually saving. Is it in the 12 to 15% range that is recommended or not? And if I've piqued your curiosity at 9 p.m., fantastic. At least there was some momentum made.
So someone's asking if you can give that name of the Facebook group again. I'll put it in the chat if you say it again.
Yeah, it's Pleasant Financial Conversations.
I just wanted to say too that, and just disclosing, being full disclosure here, there are so many of us who are afraid to make that 15% commitment. We think that we're not going to have enough available cash at the end of the day to meet our financial obligations. Speak to that and encourage us to be brave and courageous.
Yes. So this is what I hear. Like, people in my industry will come into a business and they'll say, oh, if you start at age 22 and if you just invest from 22 to 29, you just invest this small amount, then you're going to be set. If you do it for your whole life, then you're really going to be set. And then everybody that's not between 22 and 29 is like, well, I'm screwed. Pardon my French. And I think there is a whole psychological element, coaching element that those with an educational mindset that are coming to financial planning are offering. And so what I like to talk about is boiling the frog. So does anybody know how to boil a frog? I've never boiled a frog, full disclosure. But you take a frog, you put it in lukewarm water so they feel like they're in their normal state. And then slowly you turn up the heat on them. And before they know it, they're cooked. You do the same thing to yourself. So what does feel comfortable? Today, what can you commit to right now? Is it $50 a month? Is it $100 a month? Is it 3% of your paycheck? What is it? And make that commitment right now. What feels comfortable right now? And then on your calendar, put a little reminder, or every year as your birthday rolls around, increase that amount. So you're turning up the heat on yourself so that you can get to that 12 to 15% range without really feeling it. Because people get overwhelmed with the idea of like, that's so much of my income that I put that way. And then what's going to happen? I feel the anxiety of it now. So what does feel comfortable? And then challenge yourself to increase it over time. Some of you have access to a 401k that has an automatic step up where you can say every 6 months, increase this by 1%. That's a great way to do it. Out of sight, out of mind. For everybody else that doesn't have that opportunity, you have to calendar it. So.
I wonder if you can tackle a question that I think probably a lot of us are thinking about. What kind of money does someone need to have to go into retirement and be able to live? Now, I know like your financial plan, it's all individualized, but can you give us some general numbers? I saw a few heads shake when I asked that. So I think we're all curious about that, and we don't, how much is enough?
Yeah, so probably all of us remember that commercial from decades ago where everybody, like, they'd have their briefcase or their purse and it had like a number on it and like, this is my retirement number. If I hit this, then I'm good. You can put it down to a calculation, but as you said, it's very individualized. So Social Security will make up probably about 30 to 40% of your current paycheck, just by the way that it's how the number is calculated. So we have to figure out how to make up the rest of your paycheck. So a good way to just like ballpark it for yourself is to take what your current income is and let's see, you'd divide it by 4%. So let's say my current income, let's just pull out my calculator here. Let's say my current income is $75,000. Oops. I divide it by 0.04. In order to recreate that same income in full, so this is not counting Social Security, I'd have to have $1.875 million saved up right now if I was going to retire today. But the reason why that, I mean, that'll probably give you sticker shock and you'll probably feel pretty defeated with that. What I don't like about that is that one, it's not counting Social Security. Two, it's not counting in the fact that our lives change pretty substantially when we retire and we don't have the same expenses. So, but it does give you kind of a ballpark of what to reach for. Sometimes people just need a number to go towards, a goal to hit. That's a good way to just set a goal for yourself.
Other
Liz.
questions?
Yeah, I have
Go
one.
ahead.
Liz, my name's Diane. I have lived through many of the scenarios you described. I left the workforce to raise my children for about 15 years. I got divorced. I went back to work. I've done pretty well in my career over the past 10 years. And I'm getting married again. So, I've come full circle now. So my husband to be and I, we're pretty well established and financially independent. And we're looking at what do we combine? What do we keep separate? I mean, because, my financial independence was fought for and won pretty hard. So there's a part of me that wants to keep something back for myself. So, what kinds of advice do you give people who are getting married later in life, maybe who are well established?
Sure. To be clear, I'm not going to be asking for numbers. I'm just asking for account types. So I can see you're in my top left, so I can actually see you. So IRAs, 401ks, like you have both of those?
401ks.
401k.
Mm-hmm.
An individual type of account, non-retirement?
Yes. Yep.
Both like saving or bank
Yes.
and investment?
Bank and investments.
Okay. Yeah. So
and a home, I own a home.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Your decision, it'll probably just take a lot of like sitting with yourself to see what really resonates and what feels the best. So your 401ks, your IRAs, Roth IRAs, those all will end up staying in your name no matter what. It's just a matter of if you're adding your spouse to be as the beneficiary. If you want the money to flow to that person if you were to pass away. And if not, if you want that to go right to your kids, well, that's a different decision. Like, how do you want the money to flow?
Okay.
Those non-retirement accounts, those are ones that can be put together into like a joint account, or it can stay individual and you can add a beneficiary designation called a transfer on death. And that can be routed to your spouse or that can be routed to your kids. You will know. I often find that people inherently or instinctually know what feels most comfortable. And sometimes it's tied to like, well, I worked this job. And so when I was single and I was caring for my kids, and I just feel like this pot of money needs to go to those kids. For whatever reason, they've compartmentalized out that little portion of their finances. And that's a good decision. That same person can say, well, I'm partnering with this person. I want to have the full effect of like my money transferring as if we had been married, through the time that I was working. And so I'm going to have them as my beneficiary. You'll know parts of that. But oftentimes I see when people are either coming to a marriage later in life where they've both individually established themselves, or a second marriage, that there is more separate assets. So.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Liz, excuse me. So I mentioned a little earlier that one of the big things that women tend to lack is credit, and that greatly affects us as we're going through later in life. One of the saving graces when my grandfather passed was the fact that my grandmother had a JCPenney's credit card, and that was her only saving grace. And it was really a learning aspect for myself. Was it's not that like I'll never put something in somebody else's name, but how important it is to have something in your name. Even something like building credit, or certain loans feel dangerous, but there are healthy loans that you can have that are good and things like that. So I think as women, we tend to put those things off. when I had to invest in an HVAC system. I was like, oh God, I don't want to go through this loan. I looked at a credit union, and they were a heck of a lot more helpful than I would have had I just gone with a predatory loan. And trying to figure out what is okay and what's not okay, it can be very scary. And I will say some of those, one of the biggest funny things was I live alone and have my own home. And just having contractors coming to the house was really awkward. So even going forward and talking finance was really bizarre. So I can only imagine what some of these women have been through.
Yeah. And, especially when I've seen a woman who is coming off of either a divorce or death of a spouse where everything has been delegated in the family, like that the financial conversations are delegated to the spouse that is no longer in the picture. I see women pulling in parents or brothers or children, like a male child, into the conversation. And that's also why I want to have a space to create room for women to ask the questions that they need, because when you have somebody entering the conversation, they're obviously going to bring their own bias to what it is that you're doing. And so that can kind of sometimes skew the outcomes that you have. And to your point about establishing your own credit, yes, there's different ways that you can establish credit. So I wanted to do that for myself. So when we didn't buy a house, but I put my name on like the water bill. But my husband and I have kind of a role flipped engagement where I talk more about the investments and he does more of the budgeting, everyday stuff. So he was going to have all of his name on all of that. And I thought, well, this would help me with my credit. I want my credit to be good. So that's one way to do it. And then there was some other thing that you said. It sparked to the thought of sometimes even just cars. And I witnessed this with my friend who lost her husband in the boating accident. The car registration was in his name, both car registrations. And so trying to peel that off was difficult. And it's also important for women to know like that process too. So putting your name on your own car instead of having it in your spouse's name is a good idea.
I have a question on, since we're looking at like retirement, is there anything that like if we walk away, what are like the top one or two things that you would recommend? Either start talking to your group, like what I hear you say is talk to your friends and having that conversation where it becomes normalized. I think for women that's never easy, and it's always a delicate because we're just not comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. And the other thing you mentioned when something with divorce and women and retiring, because I have a friend recently who was divorced in her 30s, married for a long time, and now looking at retirement and realizing she could actually get some of her husband's Social Security because they were married for, I think, over 10 years or something. And I had mentioned it and she never thought about it. So a lot of, I think, missed opportunities that women aren't aware of when you're moving into retirement, depending on where you are in your life, in your space. So let you go with that. And my name's Katie. I'm sorry, Katie Cook.
Katie, thank you. Yes, Social Security, I feel like is not talked about enough because there is a good resource there. And I feel like as a foundation for retirement, women need to make sure that they're getting the most out of Social Security. So in those circumstances where women are stepping out of the workforce for a certain number of years, it might mean that you're working longer than the typical 62, 65, whatever, just so you can fill what I call goose eggs, those years where you have a 0 on your Social Security record, because that record is made out of 35 years of work history. And I've got a YouTube video on it. You can see how the calculation is made. But if you have 35 years that they're looking at and you've got 10 zeros in there, well, what does it mean to keep filling those zeros with your higher income now that you're later in your career? That can be really powerful for your Social Security benefit. Also, tapping into those dual eligibility or dual entitlements that you have, like you referenced, Katie. Women who have been married for 10 years and are divorced, there are some eligibility that you have. I don't want to make you think that there is, like, you can never take two benefits that you're entitled to and stack them on top of each other and get that amount of pay, but you can always choose to trigger one and then switch to another. And especially when there's death of a spouse or death of a divorced spouse, where that person, where you were married to them for 10 years and then they ended up passing away after you were divorced. There is some really strategic things that you can do with your Social Security to make sure that you get more out of it. So, and that it would take a whole training on it, but just recognizing getting the most out of your Social Security, not choosing to take it at 62 just because it's necessarily the easiest thing, might be a good decision. Trying to postpone it as long as possible and increase your record to make it, you know, all of those 35 years have at least the zero plugged.
Hey, I have a tip too. Does everyone have a Social Security account? You signed up online? It's really helpful. They ask you either, it takes a little bit of time to set it up, but they'll tell you, you know, what you're going to get, and it'll tell you different ways that you can, when you can do what, and rather than, you know, you hear those horror stories, oh, I made an appointment with the Social Security office, and you don't really need to do that. You can just get an account and it'll tell you the information you need. It's free. So it's a good resource.
Yeah, thank you, Katie, for that. Additionally, that's going to give you some peace of mind, because if you don't, like, the Social Security statements are not being mailed in the way that they used to be mailed. You don't see it every single year. So you're not reminded that you have this baseline income available to you. And so as you think about retirement, you might be thinking like, I haven't saved anything, but you still have the backbone, the structure of Social Security underneath you. And maybe some of what's keeping you up at night is just not knowing that what amount that is. So do yourself a favor and just look it up.
You're on mute, Lori.
So I know there's different trends in when you should invest more income and when you can back off, because when you look at a trend of a woman's life, it's career, marriage and children, children in college, planning and planning for retirement. So can you talk about like the trend of when to invest in, you know, your income more towards retirement, where you can maybe back off or change your strategy, whether it's more in Roth versus more in 401k?
Yeah.
Just life trend, I call it, of investing.
Sure. Well, I always like to see a trickle going towards retirement, because I think it's a psychological thing for us. What you feed grows. And so if you've got if you had an IRA that you rolled over and it's just sitting there, you might not have the same energy towards that money. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, I know I need to do something with it. But if you would even just feed it like $25 a month, you would feel better about that money itself, and it will grow long term. So at least getting a trickle at any point in time, whether it's in your 20s, which is fantastic, even when you're not working, if you could still have a little bit sent there, I always recommend that. Then, okay, so your question was lifespan of when to lean in and when to back off. Naturally, your cash flow that you have is going to dictate what you can and cannot do. So if your cash flow is down, your income is down, and you're just basically meeting your basic expenses, do what you can. Again, just a little trickle, $25, something. And then plan to lean in heavily in the times after big expenses stop. This is just a trick I like to play on the mind of, so you've been putting extra money towards your kid's college, the last one graduates, and you keep that same payment going, but you reroute it to your own accounts. I love that. Also, same idea with if you pay off your mortgage, keep that mortgage payment going, but directed towards your investments. Those are good tricks if you need to catch up, if you're finding that you're behind. Some of the other questions you said of like switching to Roth, the tax considerations of how you invest towards retirement are very individualized, but I like having Roth dollars available at some point. So if you don't need a tax deduction and you have some extra cash and it's that $25, it's that $100, it's that $500 that you're wanting to put towards your retirement, sending it post-tax into a Roth IRA is a great idea because you don't need to reduce your income for tax purposes, and you're getting it in a tax advantaged account for retirement that you can take out later without any taxes. And it's a good strategy tool to have when you're doing income planning. Other times I like to do Roth. I like converting Roths once if you have like, and again, this all depends on your personal financial situation, but if there's years where, like within this last year, I've had a couple of clients who were unexpectedly furloughed. So their income is way down for a year. There are also clients who are pretty anxious about what's happening with tax brackets. So they're concerned that tax brackets are going to increase and they're anticipating getting back in the workforce. Well, I use all of that information and I take that 1 year and convert some of their retirement dollars from pre-tax to post-tax and then have them pay the taxes on that transaction, but that betters their financial situation long term. I just realized I went like pretty heavy into a lot of jargon, so I hope that's okay. And is there an age that Roth IRAs are no longer wise? I don't think so. You have to have earned income to put money towards a Roth. Putting money in either a Roth or a pre-tax account is really all it comes down to is taxes. When do you want to pay the taxes? Now or later?
Mm-hmm.
And if you think that your taxes are going to be lower now, then go into a Roth if you're eligible for it. If you think that your taxes are going to be lower later in retirement when you're taking money out, then do a pre-tax account. So it's not age specific, it's income specific.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Sure. Thanks for the question.
I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, Liz, I'm going to ask Pam Kalika from the Greater Akron Chamber to jump in. We do offer a 401k, and I was sitting here thinking, and it's for small businesses. So if you don't mind, if Pam, can you just talk real briefly about what we do with that? It might be helpful to some of us.
Sure. We actually launched it in March of this year. We've been working towards putting it together for the last couple years since this type of product was affirmed and offered through or approved by the government. So basically, we have put together a 401k, and it's a MEF, which is a multiple employer plan. So all these employers get together, small, and they come onto our plan and offer those benefits to their employees. But because of the size of the group, the benefit structure is much larger than they would have the opportunity to do themselves. And it also gives them the opportunity to have an administrative component that's taken care of by this corporate group. So they don't have to do the reporting and all the adjudication of all of those things that come with a 401k. But basically, our CEO saw the need for that type of retirement plan to be offered at small levels. I mean, everyone should have an opportunity to invest for their future. And it is very, very hard for small employers to put those in place just because of the fact that they're doing so many other things. So if anyone is ever interested in that, you're welcome to reach out to me. We have an expert that you can talk to and he can explain all of it to you. But it's definitely something that we're seeing a lot of people take advantage of, especially those small to medium employers. It's a little hard to hire people these days. So if you can offer a benefit like that, sometimes that's all it takes to get those great employees to be part of your organization. So thanks for the minute, Jan, to make a little shameless plug.
Well, I'm curious, how many employees do you have to be eligible to participate in that?
At this time, it's probably leaning a little more towards 4, but at the end of the year, once we have all of our investors that have committed, we should have a robust enough plan to get down to 1 or 2 employees. So, you know, that was the whole theme behind this, to make it great for small employees, but you do have to build up a reserve. So we have just moved our 401k to the plan. Bounce is our next person that's moving theirs over, and they're super excited about it. And several of our larger investors are also committed to moving the 401ks. But the nice thing is you'll talk to somebody who will explain this to you. And then if you already have something in place, like through a payroll organization or something, they will tell you whether this is a better option for you. So in the case of Bounce, they are starting out from scratch, putting a new one in place for their employers. But with the 401ks that we had, it just made so much sense for us to move to the plan. We're going to be able to offer all of our employees much greater investment opportunities than we had in the past, and take all the administration off of our HR people.
You know, and thank you, Liz, for sharing that time with me. I think 401ks are sometimes confusing. You know, some of us on the call lived at a time when your employer put away a retirement plan for you. Those are really rare these days. So I do have a question for you about 401ks. What like if you work for someone and change your job, just talk about how 401ks can move, and give us a little bit of insight into how, you know, how we can think about that, and how should we think about that if we work for 3 people and we have 3 different 401ks. We've got a few minutes left here.
Yes. Well, first I want to say you guys are cutting edge. This is the first of the new plans that I've seen where they're making it multiple employer plans. That's fantastic. Congratulations on that. That's going to be such a good benefit for small businesses because of this administrative layer that happens with 401ks. That can be a headache. So well done. And I as natural as we in our lives, we move from job to job. As you said, pensions are to the wayside. So the commitment level to a company is no longer like 30, 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like 5, 7, I don't know, and maybe longer than that. But people tend to job hop. And when they do that, and they've got their little nest 401k here, and then they build another 401k here, they start making their lives pretty complicated financially, where they can't really wrap their head around how they're doing. And so you can take a 401k and you can send it to another 401k. So if you have like 2 or 3 401ks and you're actively participating in a new one, it might be worth just sending that over directly to the new 401k to consolidate your life, simplify your life, lessen the amount of statements that are being mailed. I mean, there's just so many good benefits to it. And then if it is that you have a couple of 401ks, but you no longer are eligible for a new one, and you can't participate in the one here, then you can always roll those into what's called an IRA, individual retirement account, or if you have Roth dollars, to the Roth IRA, and you kind of put them in your own name so that you can control like how you invest. The one hesitation that sometimes people have with 401ks is that you do have limited investments. So on a 401k, you might have 20 different options or 30 different options, which is a lot of options. But when you invest on your own, the world is opened up. You have like 3,000, 5,000 options of how to invest. So sometimes people want to roll a 401k into an IRA and make their own decisions on that. So
that's helpful. Are there any last minute burning questions that anyone has? Well, thank you so much, Liz. This was so helpful. I really enjoyed it. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks for putting it in language that we can relate to and understand, and hopefully helping us all have a little bit more courage to start having these kind of conversations. So maybe the next time we meet up, we can start talking about, well, what money did you make this quarter in your investment, right? Or did you make any or did you lose any? I don't know. Like, we'll have to start thinking about some of those kind of conversations. I find that fascinating that I've never thought about it in that way, that men do tend to talk about it more than women. And it's not, we typically are talking about different things than that. So thanks for giving us courage and helping us think.
I think if women, so that will feel very foreign. And so if you can find ways that feel comfortable for you to talk about money, usually it's through relationships just because of the nature of who we are. If you can find ways to understand financial decision-making processes that people are putting in place as they are working through their parents' long-term care needs, it just helps open up the conversation more. So use your strengths and open up the conversation.
And I was being facetious. I'm really not going to ask you if you made money or not. But yeah, I like the encouragement to start really thinking a little bit more logically about some of those things. So fantastic. I'm so glad that you were able to be here today. And I'm going to join your Facebook group. I didn't know you had that.
Thank you.
And I think you committed to send us something.
I did. What was it?
I wrote you, it was after you talked about the XY network. Does anybody remember? It was something about a list of resources, but I'm not sure what it was.
It was for, was it Sharon? Asking about the
education.
Yeah, there's an education platform for women who are divorced.
Yes. If you get that out to me, I'll get it out to everyone.
Okay.
And just FYI, this was recorded, and Liz, you're okay if we share the recording?
Oh, yep.
Okay. A lot of good information in this. Sometimes it's hard to remember. So when we get that link, we'll send that out to you also, that you have it as well. Thank you for being here. And anybody have any final words they want to offer? Thank you so much, Liz.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great day. Thank you all for being here. Take care. Bye-bye.